The knock came just after sundown, hard and deliberate, like someone trying to shake the bones out of the doorframe. Toby Nez stood barefoot on the porch, a coffee cup in one hand, and his late wife's shawl still draped over the rocker beside him. He'd heard the wagon wheels before he saw the shape one horse, no lantern lit, the kind of arrival that made desert dogs run and cattle grow still. Now that knock too sharp for a neighbor, too quiet for the law. He set the cup down, slow, stepped off the porch, and into the red dirt yard where wind tugged at his shirt, and the mesquite creaked under the weight of night. The wagon waited like a question. A single figure sat in the driver's seat, unmoving. "Evening," he called. The figure didn't answer, just climbed down stiff slow like her bones hurt. A woman, maybe mid-40s. Dine. Her shawl was frayed, her skirt coated in dust, and her eyes were set deep with something worn and dark. When she reached the edge of the yard, she didn't stop walking. She walked right up to him like she'd already decided what came next. "Toby Nez?" she asked, voice dry and brittle. He nodded. "That's me. You the one they say keeps to himself. Don't scare easy." He frowned. "Who's asking?" The woman's jaw flexed. "Name's Selena. I brought you someone." Toby glanced past her toward the wagon. What kind of someone? Selena looked over her shoulder. "My niece. 13. Her father sold her off to Santiago Valles for $300 and the promise he wouldn't break his legs." Toby didn't speak, not at first. He had no words for what churned in his chest. "She's in the back," Selena continued. "Didn't know where else to take her. But folks say you don't bend when trouble leans in." Santiago. Toby said the name hitting the dirt like a bullet. "Why her?" "Because she's young and pretty and her father's gutless." Her voice cracked. "The wedding's set for Sunday. If she goes through with it, she won't live past 20. Where's her mother?" "Dead 3 winters now." The wind shifted, the scent of creosote, and something sharp, maybe sage, maybe blood, drifted through the dark. Toby rubbed the scar on the back of his neck. "You sure bringing her here didn't just paint a target on both of us?" "I'm sure." Selena met his eyes. "Because if I don't leave her here, she's gonna die in some man's bed who doesn't care if she's a child." He looked at her for a long moment, then at the wagon, then back. "I need to see her," he said. Selena nodded once, then turned and climbed back up. She pulled the canvas back. A small face peeked out from the shadow, then pulled away. Selena didn't speak, just stepped aside. Toby moved closer, slowly, hands visible. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently. "Just want to know your name." There was silence, then a whisper, "Nolly." He crouched beside the wagon boots planted in the dust. "How old are you, Nolly?" 13. "Your aunt says you don't want to marry this man." Her eyes met his, dark and direct. "I'm too young to be a wife." The words didn't shake. They cut. Toby stood slow and heavy. His breath came harder now. He looked up at the stars just beginning to show behind the clouds. "He'll come," he said. "Santiago. He'll bring others." "I know," Selena said. "But if she stays on that path, he won't need to. She'll break down on her own." His mind drifted to the small grave behind the barn. His daughter Mia gone at 10. Fever took her. His wife followed a year later, grief taking what sickness didn't. If Mia had been in that wagon. He turned toward the barn. "There's a trap door behind the grain sacks. Leads to a root cellar. Dry, cool, safe." Selena exhaled, shoulders falling. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he muttered. Just help me move the sacks." They walked the wagon into the barn under cover of dusk. Selena pulled the girl gently from the back. Nolly's legs were stiff, her steps slow, but she moved on her own. Toby unlatched the trap door and stepped back as Nolly peered into the darkness. "It's quiet down there," he said. "No one knows it's here but me." She turned to him. "Why are you helping me? Because you said the truth?" She nodded, then stepped down into the dark, small hands trailing against the wall. Toby shut the door gently and covered it with sacks of feed. Selena stood beside him. "You're a good man." "Good men don't usually end up on Santiago Vallese's list," he said flatly. Selena looked at the barn door like she wanted to burn it behind her. Then, when she turned to go, Toby followed her out, watched her mount the wagon, and disappear into the darkness she came from. Alone again. Only not quite. The moon rose behind the hills, and wind curled like a whisper through the scrub brush. He could feel it already, the storm brewing. Not rain. Men. He walked back to the house, took his rifle from the wall, and cleaned it by lantern light. His hand didn't shake, but his heart did. In the quiet, he heard the faintest sound, wood creaking, the cellar door adjusting to her weight. Not a prisoner, not a runaway. Just a child. A girl too young to be owned. He set the rifle beside his chair, poured the last of the coffee, and stared into the dark. They'd come looking, with guns and papers and their idea of justice. He'd have to decide how far he was willing to go, because hiding her was one thing. Keeping her safe would be something else entirely. This is where the world stops looking at you like a child and starts treating you like currency. The morning came slow and gray, seeping into the cracks of the barn like smoke. Toby Nez stood in the doorway with a tin plate of beans, a cut biscuit, and a folded cloth of salt pork, his breath fogging in the cold. The night had been silent, too silent. No coyotes, no wind, no sounds from the cattle pens, only the weight of what lay beneath the floor. He pushed open the barn door and stepped inside. Dust motes caught in the light as it slipped between the planks. His boots creaked against the boards. When he reached the far corner, he crouched, pulled the grain sacks aside, and opened the trapdoor. A waft of cool, still air met him. "Nolly," he called down softly. She stirred. He heard the shift of cloth, a small cough. Then her face emerged from the dark, pale and wary. "I brought food," he said, keeping his voice low. She blinked up at him, eyes rimmed red but dry. He took that as a kind of strength. She climbed up, her thin frame moving stiffly, hair clinging to one cheek. She didn't speak, just sat down on the edge of the trapdoor while he handed her the plate. "Eat slow. Haven't had much lately, I'd guess." She nodded and picked at the biscuit. Her fingers were raw-looking dirt under the nails. The pork disappeared first. Then she paused. "You're not going to send me back?" Toby shook his head. "No. I said I wouldn't." She looked down at her food again. "You could say I ran off, that you didn't know I could. You'd be safer." Toby rubbed the side of his jaw. "I've been safe before. Doesn't count for much when it costs someone else their freedom." She didn't say anything, just kept chewing. After a moment he stood and looked around the barn. The horses stirred in their stalls. One kicked softly. Dust fell from the rafters. "Selena say how long we have Nolly swallowed." "Sunday." "That's the wedding. That's 2 days. I think he'll come before that." He nodded, mostly to himself. Santiago's not the waiting kind. She set the plate down half-finished. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me. Toby crouched down again, this time facing her directly. Listen, you're not the reason trouble's coming. Men like Santiago bring trouble all on their own. You just made it visible. She looked away, her jaw clenched. He offered my father money if he'd promised not to look back. Told him it was mercy. Said I was lucky someone wanted me before I turned useless. The words hit the dirt with a heaviness neither of them could lift. He talked like that to Selena. She spit at him. Toby smiled faintly. Good. There was a silence, but not the uncomfortable kind. Just space. Breathing room. I used to think if I was quiet enough, invisible enough, I'd be left alone, Nolly said suddenly. But it just made me easier to trade. Toby stared at her. So young and already talking like she'd seen too much of the world. This is where the world stops looking at you like a child, she murmured, and starts treating you like currency. He stood slowly. The plate made a soft clink as he picked it up. There's someone I want you to meet, he said. Her eyes narrowed. Someone else, a friend. Old one. Lives close but off the path. Name's Amos Two Feathers. Will he tell no? He's helped folks hide before. Quiet types, broken types. Folks the law forgot about. She didn't answer, but her shoulders eased a bit. Maybe just enough to breathe deeper. I'll bring him here tonight. Nolly glanced toward the barn door where the light was brighter now. She stood slowly, legs stiff. Can I stay up here for a while? Sure. Just stay out of sight if anyone rides close. He moved toward the door, then stopped. And if you hear voices, don't come up unless you hear your name. Understand, she nodded. I'm good at hiding. He turned and left, heart heavier than when he came in. By dusk, Amos was already waiting at the edge of the cottonwoods behind the ranch. Wrapped in a long deerskin coat, gray hair in a low braid, he leaned on a carved staff like a prophet out of time. You picked a hell of a horse to bet on, Amos said without smiling. Toby nodded. She's worth it. Maybe, but Santiago won't see it that way. Toby led him through the side path into the barn, lantern in hand. Nolly sat on a hay bale wrapped in a quilt Toby's wife had sewn years ago. Her eyes widened when she saw Amos. He's safe, Toby said gently. Amos stepped forward. His gaze wasn't soft, but it wasn't unkind either. He looked her over without saying a word, then sat down across from her. You got a name, Nolly. Means my niece. You're somebody's blood. My father doesn't care. Amos shook his head. He just forgot what names mean. Doesn't mean you have to. She blinked, caught off guard by that. Amos reached into his coat and pulled out a bundle dried herbs tied with rawhide, a small polished stone, and a beaded cord. Charm bag, he said. Not magic. Not nonsense. Just a reminder. You keep it close, it'll remind you of who you are when the world tries to make you forget. He handed it to her. She held it like it might vanish. Thank you, she whispered. I'll check the trails tomorrow, Amos said to Toby as he stood. If there's movement, we'll know. Toby walked him out the back way. You think we have time, maybe a day? No more. The air was cold. Smoke curled from Toby's chimney like a warning. When he returned, Nolly had laid back on the hay, the charm bag clutched to her chest. She wasn't asleep, but her eyes were closed. Toby left the lantern low. He stood in the barn doorway, looking out into the dark stars scattered above like a map of something he no longer understood. They'd come. Soon. He just didn't know how many. or who'd turn. There's a price on her head, and Santiago just made it real easy to want $100 more than your conscience. The dust reached Toby's ranch before the riders did thin ribbons of red stirred up by hooves, pounding the hardpan from miles off. He saw it first while he was working the east fence line, mending where wind had toppled a post the week before. When the wind shifted and carried the sound of horses behind it, his gut tensed the way it used to before a fight. He straightened and squinted against the glare, hand resting on the worn handle of the fencing pliers. One rider, then two, three total. He knew the lead horse before he saw the face. Harlan Moon rode easy in the saddle, one leg dangling loose like he didn't have a care in the world. But Toby knew Harlan well enough to recognize the stiffness in his shoulders. Trouble clung to him like dust. By the time they reached the fence line, Toby had tossed the pliers aside and pulled his hat low against the sun. Harlan. Toby. The other two men stayed back, local hands from a ranch on the far side of the basin. Toby didn't know them by name, but he didn't have to. Harlan leaned forward, lowered his voice. Words out. How far all the way to Domingo and back? Velez ain't hiding it. Told every saloon and feed store between here and the mountains that he's offering $100 for the girl. No questions. Toby's jaw clenched. Desperate men don't need questions, Harlan added. Just a name and a direction. Toby looked over Harlan's shoulder. The other two weren't listening, or pretending not to. He pay up front, Toby asked. Half, other half on delivery. Toby cursed under his breath. And the law. Harlan hesitated, and that was all Toby needed. He buy the deputy. He didn't have to. Tomas was there when the contract was signed. Figured it was legal. Still does. Toby's hands went to his hips, fingers flexing slow. The girl didn't sign anything. No one asked her to. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of creosote and horses. Toby turned toward the hills. Far-off vultures circled something he couldn't see. He's not just making noise, is he? No, Harlan said. He's gathering. Toby looked at him hard. And you riding with him, I'm riding with you. Toby gave a nod. Not thanks, just understanding. Anyone else? Harlan scratched his chin. Maybe Amos. Maybe one or two more if you ask the right way. But most folks'll sit this one out. They know what Santiago is. They just don't want to be under him when he falls. Toby glanced toward the barn. The boards looked peaceful in the sun, like nothing was buried underneath them. Girl still here? Harlan asked. She's here. She knows enough. Harlan took off his hat, wiped the sweat from his brow. $100. That's a month's wages for some. 2 if you don't eat too well. Toby's voice came low. There's a price on her head, and Santiago just made it real easy to want $100 more than your conscience. Harlan didn't argue. They stood there in silence, the fence between them and the oncoming weight of decisions they hadn't yet made. You hear from Luciana? Harlan finally asked. Not yet. But Selena left word. She'll come if she can. She better hurry. Toby nodded. Harlan mounted again. I'll stay close to the canyon. If I see movement, I'll send smoke. 3 puffs. Always. Toby watched them ride off. His throat was dry, the heat pressing in like judgment. He didn't go back to mending fence. He walked the whole ridge instead, making mental notes of every blind spot, every angle of approach. Then he went to the barn. Inside, Nolly sat cross-legged on the hay, the charm bag Amos had given her tied tight to her wrist. She looked up the moment he stepped in, reading him, before he said a word. "They're looking," she said. He nodded. "How many enough?" She looked down. "You could still send me back. You want me to know." Her voice was steady now, without apology. "But if they hurt you, I'll never forgive myself." Toby leaned against the wall. "You're not the one swinging the fists. You think the law will stop him? No. But maybe someone who can talk to the law will." He crossed the barn, checked the cellar hatch, then the windows. Every hinge. Every beam. When he came back, Nolly was staring out the narrow slat where daylight slipped in. "I used to think if I ran far enough, fast enough, I'd end up somewhere no one could find me." He sat beside her. "That's not how the world works." "No," she said, "but sometimes you run anyway." They sat in quiet, the dust settling in shafts of light between them. Toby handed her a knife, small, bone-handled and sharp. "Keep it hidden," he said. "Last resort." She took it without flinching. He watched her fingers grip the hilt, tight and sure. He saw something in her that wasn't there before. Not just fear, grit, fire. "You know how to use it." "I've cleaned rabbits. Men are messier. I'll manage." He smiled, but only a little. It didn't reach his eyes. As night came, Amos returned with fresh water and 2 pouches of herbs. He brought word, too. Santiago had been seen heading east with 4 men, 2 wagons, and enough supplies for a siege. "They'll be here by tomorrow," Amos said. Toby nodded once. "Then we don't sleep tonight." He walked to the barn door and looked out into the gathering dark. The wind shifted again, cooler now, but not comfortable. The kind of wind that warned you to check your footing before you took your next step. The coyotes began their cries out in the hills, long and ragged. The moon wasn't full, but it was enough to cast everything in silver. Toby turned to Amos. "Make smoke at first light. Let Harlan know we're not alone." Amos touched Nolly's shoulder gently, then slipped out into the dark. Toby closed the barn door, bolted it, and leaned his rifle against the wall within arm's reach. Nolly curled up again in the quilt, back to the wall, the knife now tucked into her sleeve. Outside, the air shifted again, and the horses grew restless. Santiago Valles was coming, and Toby Nez had already made up his mind. He said it was a wedding, but everyone could feel it. This was a sale, and Toby Nez just refused to let the deal close. The sound of hooves shattered the stillness just after sunrise. 5 of them, maybe 6. Toby Nez had been sitting on the porch, his rifle resting across his lap, steam curling from the tin cup in his hand. He didn't move when the dust kicked up on the trail. Didn't have to. They came fast riders spread out in a rough arrowhead. At the front rode Santiago Valles, broad-shouldered, dark hat, pulled low mouth set in a hard line. His horse was jet black, all muscle and heat. Beside him rode Deputy Tomas Delgado, badge flashing dully against his vest. Behind them 2 ranch hands and a 3rd man who rode with a limp. And trailing last a rider Toby hadn't wanted to see, Eben Yazzie, slumped and thin, his eyes downcast. Toby rose slowly, not bothering to knock the dirt from his boots. He stepped off the porch and stood with the rifle in both hands, barrel low but steady. Santiago pulled his horse to a stop a dozen feet out. The others fanned wide. Dust swirled between them like a warning. "Toby Nez," Santiago said. His voice was smooth as oiled leather. "You know why I'm here?" "I do," Toby answered. "But say it anyway." Santiago's lips twitched something between a smirk and a snarl. "I'm here for the girl. Nolly Yazzie. She was promised to me. The contract's signed. She's mine." Toby didn't blink. "You buy cattle, Santiago, not children." Deputy Delgado cleared his throat, awkward, already sweating in the saddle. The marriage was approved by her father. That makes it legal under the code. Toby looked past Santiago straight at Eben Yazzie. You signed that paper. Eben couldn't meet his eyes. He just gave a miserable nod. To pay a debt, Toby asked. The silence hung heavy. Santiago's voice came again sharp. He owes me 300, not including interest. A fair trade. And the girl will be treated well better than most in this territory. She's 13, which is old enough under the law. And besides, we're not here to argue morality, are we? Toby raised the rifle slightly, not aimed, just present. The air changed with that motion, the horses restless, the men shifting in their saddles. Let me make something clear, Toby said. The only reason you're standing on this porch and not bleeding in my yard is because I believe in giving a man one chance to turn around. You threatening me, Santiago sneered. No, Toby said. I'm telling you, your business is done here. Santiago dismounted in a slow, deliberate motion. His boots crunched in the dirt. You're harboring a runaway. That's a crime. I could have the law drag her out of your barn. Toby took a step forward, blocking the path. You try that, and I'll put you down. Delgado's hand hovered near his holster, unsure. Santiago's voice dropped. I don't think you understand. That girl belongs to me, and you don't get to decide what's right. The law's on my side. Toby's voice was like gravel. Not everything that's legal is right, and not everything that's right waits for permission. Eben finally spoke, voice thin. Toby, please. You don't know what he'll do. He has friends in every town between here and the border. Toby knows exactly what I'll do, Santiago snapped. I've been civil so far. Civil men don't show up with guns to claim girls like livestock. Santiago's smile vanished. Last chance. Bring her out and we walk away clean. From inside the barn, the horses kicked and snorted, sensing tension in the air. Toby shifted slightly enough to make sure the trapdoor inside the barn stayed blocked from view. You came here with a contract. Paper doesn't own people. She's not yours. I paid. You paid to hurt someone. The deputy tried again. Look, maybe we let the marshal handle this. No. Santiago snapped. This is private. And it's nearly Sunday. She's not going to your altar, Toby said. You can ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of or stay and see what happens when you try to take what's not yours. One of the ranch hands spoke up for the first time. He won't shoot, boss. Not over some kid. Toby looked at him, eyes dark. Try me. Silence fell. A long, charged silence. Even the wind paused. Santiago's boots shifted in the dirt. His hand brushed his belt, then dropped. He turned slightly, then looked back at Toby with a look that could cut through steel. This ain't over, good Toby said. Now you know where to find me. Santiago swung into the saddle. His horse reared once before settling. The deputy cast one last uncertain glance at Toby, then followed. The other men turned. Eben lingered a moment longer, opening his mouth like he might say something, but the words died, and he turned away. The riders disappeared over the ridge, the dust settling slow behind them. Toby stayed where he was, rifle still in hand, muscles coiled. Only when the sound of hooves faded completely did he lower the barrel. He turned and walked into the barn. The moment the door closed behind him, Nolly emerged from behind the stack of hay. Her hands were clenched into fists, her face pale but dry. They really think they can own me. They do. She stepped forward. They'll come back, won't they? They will. What happens then? Toby looked at her, seeing more steel in her eyes than fear now. Then we make sure the right people hear your voice. Her fingers brushed the charm bag at her wrist. What if that's not enough? Then we find someone who'll speak louder. Outside, the sun had climbed high, baking the earth and the sins of men into the dust. Inside the barn, the shadows were cool and deep, and the silence felt like the eye of a coming storm. The sale hadn't closed, and as long as Toby Nez stood on that land, it never would. If you can silence a girl, you own her. If you let her speak, you risk losing the world you built. The letter was already 3 days old when Toby sent Amos to deliver it. Written in his careful, slanted hand on stiff yellow paper, it carried only the truth that a child had been sold, that she had not agreed, and that the law intended to pretend otherwise. It wasn't addressed to a court or a sheriff. It was sent to a woman. Luciana Reyes didn't wear a badge. She didn't own land. But her husband rode circuit judging cases from mountain camps to adobe towns. And Luciana, quiet, quick-eyed, and unafraid, had more sway than most men carrying a gavel. Toby folded the letter into Amos's hand without ceremony. "She'll understand," Amos said. "She'll have to." Toby replied. The old man tucked it into his coat and disappeared into the hills like smoke. He'd take the long trail where few would think to follow and be back before the moon had turned. In the meantime, Toby waited. The barn had become its own kind of quiet world. Nolly still slept in the cellar at night, but during the day she sat in the loft or walked between the beams of light that cut through the slats. She said little, but she moved like someone not afraid to be seen anymore. She carried the small knife he'd given her and sharpened it in careful strokes with a flat stone Amos had brought. That morning, as the sky burned orange and red behind the hills, Toby brought her a tin plate and sat with her while she ate. She chewed slowly, wiping her fingers on her skirt, eyes still and thoughtful. "You hear anything from the woman?" she asked. "Not yet. But she'll come." Nolly looked at him. "You believe that I believe in the kind of people who don't ask permission to do the right thing?" She nodded almost to herself. "My mother used to say justice moves slow, but it always gets where it's going." "Smart woman," Toby said. "She was strong, not loud. But when she said something, you didn't forget it." Nolly's voice softened. "When she died, my father just bent, like a tree in a storm. And when Santiago came with that contract, it was like he'd been waiting for someone to tell him what to do. You don't forgive him." "I can't. Not yet." Toby didn't push her. Some things had to stay raw. Later that day, they walked the edges of the property. Toby showed her where the trails split, which brush could be used to mask a fire, how the wind moved through the pass. She listened alert, asking smart questions. Every so often he caught a glimpse of the child she still was. But most of the time she carried herself like someone older than her bones. Near dusk they returned to the barn. Nolly sat near the hay bales, fingering the beadwork on the charm bag Amos had given her. "If you had a daughter still," she said, not looking up, "what would you want her to become?" Toby hesitated. Whatever she wanted. Free, whole, unbent. Nolly nodded. "I used to think I might teach." "You still can." Her voice dropped. "Not if he finds me." Toby knelt down beside her. "You're not going back to him." "I know, but that doesn't mean he won't try." Their eyes met. "You ever think about what you'd say if someone actually listened?" she asked. "All the time." She looked away again. "If you can silence a girl, you own her. If you let her speak, you risk losing the world you built. Toby breathed out slow. That's why we make sure they hear you. That night, while Nolly slept, Toby sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap and his coffee gone cold. The sky above was cloudless. Coyotes yipped far off, but the wind was quiet. He waited until just after midnight before he heard a single owl cry twice, then once more. He stood, walked to the edge of the cottonwoods, and saw Amos emerge from the shadows. Behind him rode a woman on a buckskin mare, her cloak drawn close and her eyes sharp even in the dark. Luciana Reyes dismounted like someone used to traveling without guards. Her hair was silvered at the edges, her face weathered by sun and silence. She held out her hand. "You wrote that letter like a man who had no doubts," she said. "I didn't." "Where is she in the barn? Anyone seen you? Not unless they were on the ridge." Luciana nodded. "Then let's not waste time." Inside the barn, Nolly had already risen. She stood barefoot on the wooden boards wrapped in her quilt, watching the two figures enter, like she'd sensed them coming. Luciana paused, studying her. "Nolly Yazi." "Yes, ma'am. I'm Luciana. I came because of what they're trying to do, but I'd rather hear it from you." Nolly stepped forward. Her voice didn't shake. "I didn't agree. They made a deal without me. They think I'm something to pass off. I'm not." Luciana watched her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Good." I needed to hear it. Toby stood off to the side, arms folded. "You think it's enough?" "Not yet," Luciana said. "But it's a beginning. The law likes clean lines. We're going to make sure they see the cracks in this one." She turned to Nolly. "You'll need to be ready. Santiago will push harder now. He'll make noise. Spread lies. I'm used to being lied about." Luciana gave her a tight smile. "Then you're already stronger than most." She left before dawn, slipping back into the hills with Amos guiding her. No words wasted, no promises made that couldn't be kept. But she carried Nolly's voice with her. When the sun rose, Toby stood at the barn door watching the trail fade into light. Nolly stood beside him, holding the charm bag in one hand, her other clenched at her side. "She's going to help, she already has." Nolly turned back toward the barn. "I want to be ready." "You will be." Toby looked toward the ridge where the wind had started to rise. A figure was standing there alone watching the ranch. He stepped forward, squinting, heart-kicking once against his ribs. The woman's silhouette lingered only a second longer before disappearing behind the rocks. Nolly came to his side. Who was that? I don't know. But deep in his chest he felt it. Something else was coming. And it wasn't done with silence. One girl disappeared after the wedding. Then another. Santiago always pays his debts with lives he doesn't own. She came just after midday, quiet as a ghost cutting through the cottonwoods like she belonged to the trees. No horse, no hat, just a woman in worn riding boots and a long dark shawl that brushed her knees. Toby spotted her from the rise behind the barn where he'd been scanning for riders. She didn't come down the main trail. She moved on foot along the creek bed, like someone who'd been taught not to leave tracks behind. By the time he met her near the corral, she had already stopped and stood still, hands empty, expression unreadable. "You're watching the ridge," she said, her voice low, sure. "That's good. He'll come from the other side." Toby took a long look at her. Apache, maybe part Spanish. 40 or thereabouts. Her eyes were dark, sharp, and flat, like someone who'd seen too much and didn't flinch anymore. "You know him," Toby said. "I'm his sister." Toby didn't reach for his rifle, but his shoulders tightened. "You've got my attention." She nodded like she'd expected that. "My name is Ramona Velez. I came because I heard what he's trying to do." She looked toward the barn. "The girl Nolly. She's young. I know exactly what Santiago does to girls like her." Toby didn't speak. Ramona's gaze flicked back to him. "He'll tell you it's legal. He always does. He gets the signature, makes sure the law looks the other way. But once she's under his roof, no one asks questions again. I'm not giving her up. That's why I came." She stepped closer, her voice colder now. "You're not the first man to stand between him and a child. The last one ended up dead outside a cantina in Las Cruces. Sheriff ruled it self-defense. But the girl never seen again. No body, no name left behind." Toby frowned. How many? Ramona's mouth twisted. One girl disappeared after the wedding, then another. Santiago always pays his debts with lives he doesn't own. Toby felt it then like ice in his spine. "Why now?" "Why speak up? Because I'm tired of pretending we don't share blood," she said. "And I'm tired of watching him rot everything he touches." He studied her face. The anger there wasn't new. It had been settling for years, deepening in the corners of her mouth and under her eyes. "I tried to stop the last wedding," she said. "The mother begged me. I went to the sheriff. He laughed in my face, said it wasn't my business." Toby nodded once. "Now it is. He'll come back with a warrant. I guarantee it. Luciana Reyes is already involved." Ramona let out a sharp breath, part laugh, part disbelief. "Then maybe there's a chance." They stood there in the wind, two strangers brought together by one man's reach. "She'll need to speak," Ramona said. Loud, clear, before he silences her with a new name and locked doors. "She's ready." Ramona looked toward the barn again. "I want to meet her." Toby hesitated, then motioned her inside. The light filtered through the slats in golden streaks. Nolly stood near the hay bales, sharpening her knife with slow, practiced movements. When she saw Ramona, she stiffened, stepping slightly behind the post. "She's fine," Toby said. "She came to help." Ramona removed her shawl, revealing a long braid shot with silver and a plain blouse stitched with beadwork. She stepped forward and crouched down in front of Nolly. "You don't know me," she said, "but I know the man who's hunting you." Nolly didn't answer, but she didn't look away. "My name is Ramona. Santiago is my brother, and he's done this before." Nolly's voice came out small but steady. "What happened to the others?" Ramona swallowed. "The last girl, they said she ran off. No one ever found her. The one before, she tried to get help. Santiago had the deputy lock her in a shed until the ceremony. Afterward, she never left his house again. Did anyone try to stop him? Not the right people. Not loud enough." Nolly's fingers gripped the knife tighter. Ramona reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, edges frayed, colors fading. A young girl, maybe 15, stood next to a man too large to belong in the frame. Her eyes were hollow. "She was the first," Ramona said. "Her name was Isela. She died 2 years later. The doctor called it a fever." "I don't believe it." Nolly stared at the photograph, then looked up at Ramona. "I won't be next." Ramona nodded. "No, you won't." That evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, Toby sat with Ramona on the porch, while Nolly wrote a letter by lantern light in the barn. A statement. Luciana had asked for it, something in her own words. Ramona had offered to help, but Nolly had shaken her head. I want to write it myself, she'd said. All of it. Toby watched her silhouette through the slats. She's not afraid to speak anymore. She never was, Ramona said. She just didn't know anyone would listen. Toby sipped his coffee. You're risking a lot coming here. I know, if Santiago finds out, he already knows. Toby turned to her. Ramona didn't blink. I saw one of his men tailing me near the river bend. Didn't follow me to the ranch, but he knows where I went. Then we don't have much time. No. We don't. Toby stood. You stay tonight. Hide in the barn if you have to. Come morning we start gathering whoever's got a spine and a rifle. And if no one does, then we stand with who we've got. The air was still thick with dust and rising heat. A bad sign. The land held its breath before the break. In the barn, Nolly folded her letter and placed it in the center of a book. Her fingers paused over the cover, a tattered reader with her mother's name written inside. She glanced toward the door, toward the dark. He was out there. She knew it. But now she had names. She had faces. She had her own words. And someone was finally listening. The paper said kidnapping, but Toby read it like it was written in blood, not ink. The morning rose thick with heat, dry wind snapping the branches of mesquite and stirring loose dirt into the air. Toby stood just inside the barn door watching the horizon. His rifle leaned against the wall, loaded. Beside him, Ramona sat sharpening her blade with quiet patience, her face unreadable. Nolly was up before dawn, eyes heavy but alert, braiding her hair with trembling fingers. None of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. A sharp whistle came from the canyon rim. Toby stepped out and scanned the rocks. Smoke. 3 short puffs rising like ghosts into the sky. Harlan's signal. Movement on the trail. He turned back to the barn. They're coming. Nolly froze. How many too far to count? Ramona stood, blade sliding back into its sheath. Time to choose our ground. Toby checked the traps, the barricade in the barn loft, the side hatch in the cellar. He handed Nolly a small satchel, dry bread canteen, her charm bag inside. If it turns, you go. South through Amos's Grove. Ramona will lead you. I'm not leaving. You will if I tell you to. She held his stare, her voice tight. Not without fighting. He didn't argue, just nodded once. By the time the riders appeared at the edge of the property, the sun had cleared the hilltops. 6 of them this time. At the front rode Marshal Cullen, an older man with a lined face and weary eyes. He carried a folded paper in one hand and a holstered pistol in the other. Behind him, Santiago Valles rode tall, and the saddle mouth curled in satisfaction. Deputy Delgado flanked him, badge glinting like fool's gold. The rest were muscle, 2 strangers armed, and a third man on a pale gray horse with a hard jaw and a twitch in his left hand. Eben Yazzie brought up the rear again. Shoulders slumped, hat pulled low. Toby stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, but lowered. Harlan had arrived earlier and now waited at the corner of the barn with his own rifle across his lap. Amos sat farther back, silent but watchful. The marshal dismounted and approached. Toby Nez Marshal. The older man unfolded the paper and held it up, though he didn't seem eager to read it. I've got a warrant here accusing you of kidnapping and obstruction of justice. Signed by the county clerk, verified by the deputy. Toby didn't glance at the paper. He kept his eyes on Santiago. She came here willingly, Toby said. She asked for protection. Her aunt brought her because she feared for her life. Her father signed the contract, the marshal said, and the girl didn't. She never agreed. Santiago chuckled from his saddle. She's a child. Her consent's not required. Ramona stepped forward, voice sharp. You think that means she belongs to you? I paid for her, Santiago snapped. That's not marriage, Ramona said. That's buying a person. The marshal shifted, uncomfortable. It's not for us to decide. That's for a judge. Then bring a judge, Toby said. Let her speak for herself. Let someone hear her before they hand her over. Santiago rolled his eyes. This is nonsense. This man is harboring stolen property. Nolly's voice cut through the standoff like flint striking iron. I'm not property. Everyone turned. She stepped out from behind the barn, chin-high hair, braided face, pale but calm. Her voice was loud enough to carry, clear enough to hurt. You think I'm something to trade, she said to Santiago. But you don't own me. The marshal blinked, startled. You understand what's happening here. I understand more than all of you, she said. You're standing there waving a paper like it means something. But the paper said, kidnapping, and I walked onto this land myself. You want to pretend I didn't say no, then you'll have to hear it again. No, I do not consent. I never did. Santiago's face darkened. She's been manipulated. She's been protected, Ramona said coldly, by the people you couldn't buy. Delgado opened his mouth, then shut it. The marshal looked between Santiago and the girl, his jaw working silently. Toby stepped forward, holding out his hand to Nolly. She crossed to him, never looking back. You heard her, Toby said. Now you decide. You take her by force, and every man here will remember what side you were on when the dust settles. The silence that followed was long and loaded. Marshal Cullen folded the paper and slipped it into his coat. I'm not drawing steel over a child's future, he said. If she wants to tell her story, she can do it in court. But I won't drag her off a ranch like a fugitive. Santiago reeled his horse forward. This isn't finished. You're letting emotion cloud the law. The law needs clarity, Cullen replied. And this one's muddy. Ramona stepped up beside Toby. Then clean it in court. With a judge. With all the names Santiago's buried. Santiago's eyes blazed. You think this ends with a speech and a scared little girl, Nolly said. It ends when someone listens. Santiago spat into the dirt. You're all fools. Delgado lowered his eyes. Maybe. The marshal turned his horse. We'll ride out. But I expect to see her in town come morning. You'll see her, Toby said, with someone who can speak for her. The group pulled away, dust rising like a curtain behind them. Eben Yazzie didn't look back. Santiago did. Toby waited until they were gone before lowering his rifle. Nolly's hands were shaking, but she stood tall. You did good, Ramona said. I'm not done. No, Toby agreed. Now we make sure they can't ignore you again. The wind kicked up sudden and strong, as if the land had been holding its breath. The paper might have said kidnapping, but what they'd just witnessed was something closer to freedom. Not complete. Not yet. But it had a voice now, and it would not be silenced. You never forget the first time someone listens to you and doesn't flinch. The courthouse in Domingo wasn't much more than 4 walls and a roof that creaked when the wind leaned hard on it, but today it felt like the center of the whole territory. The townspeople had gathered early, stirred by talk of a girl who defied her father, a freighter who claimed a bride by contract, and a rancher with no fear of guns or lawmen. Toby stood beside Nolly on the wooden steps, the sky already high and hot above them. She wore a plain calico dress that hung a little loose on her frame. Her hair was braided tight charm bag around her wrist. She didn't speak, didn't fidget. Just breathed steady like she was holding something inside and wouldn't let go until she was heard. Luciana Reyes stepped out of the courthouse first. Her dark shawl trailed behind her like a banner, her eyes sharp as ever. She had brought with her Judge Callahan, her husband, who had agreed to hold an emergency hearing after reading Nolly's written testimony. "We go in now," Luciana said. "It'll be small. Private but official." Nolly nodded. Toby looked down at her. "You sure I'm ready?" Inside the benches were mostly empty. Ramona sat near the front, her hands folded back straight. Harlan and Amos stood just behind her. Eben Yazzie had not come. No one expected him to. Santiago Valles stood at the opposite table, clean-shaven and smug, flanked by Deputy Delgado and a hired lawyer from Santa Fe, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The judge took his seat with a tired sigh, adjusting his glasses before speaking. "We're here to determine the legitimacy of a marriage contract made between one Santiago Valles and Miss Nolly Yazzie, age 13, and to assess whether the girl's presence on the ranch of Mr. Toby Nez constitutes kidnapping or protection. Miss Yazzie, you may speak." Nolly stood slowly. Her voice, when it came, didn't tremble. "My name is Nolly Yazzie. I'm 13 years old. My mother died 2 years ago. Since then, my father has struggled. Santiago Valles offered him money. He told my father that if he agreed to the marriage, the debt would vanish. My father signed. I didn't." Judge Callahan watched her carefully. "Do you understand what marriage means?" She nodded. "It means you share your life. Your name, your home, your body. And you can't take it back if you change your mind." There was a stir in the back of the room. Amos murmured something under his breath, and Harlan nodded slow. "Did anyone ask for your consent?" the judge asked. "No, sir." Santiago's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, with all respect, under current territorial law, parental consent is sufficient." The girl's father signed. Mr. Valles fulfilled all obligations required. Luciana's voice rang out clear and slicing. "Then the law needs to reckon with the reality of what it's enabling. This isn't a legal contract. It's a sale." Santiago stood angry now. "I don't have to be insulted in this room." "You don't have to be in this room at all," the judge said, not unkindly. "But you chose to come, and I suggest you listen." Nolly turned toward Santiago, then her voice stronger. "You never asked what I wanted. You thought you could just take me. You thought no one would care." He opened his mouth, but she didn't stop. "My aunt cared. Toby cared. Ramona came because she saw what you are. And now the law sees too." Judge Callahan leaned forward. "And what is it you want?" Miss Yazzie Nolly stood tall. "I want to be free. I want to live without waking up scared. I want to grow up before someone decides I don't get to." The room was quiet, still hot with something that wasn't just weather. Respect. Or maybe the early edge of change. "You never forget the first time someone listens to you and doesn't flinch," Nolly said softly. "I don't want this to happen to any other girl." The judge looked down at the paper in front of him, then up again. "I find that the contract is invalid. Consent was not freely given by the one most affected. As for Mr. Nez, he acted in the interest of protection, not criminal intent. Charges dismissed." Santiago barked a curse, stepping forward, but Delgado placed a hand on his arm. "She was mine by law," he hissed. "She was never yours," Ramona said, rising to her feet. "You just thought she was easier to control. Luciana approached Nolly and laid a hand on her shoulder. It's over. Nolly looked at Toby, and he gave her a quiet nod. Outside, the town had gone still, waiting. When the courthouse doors opened and Nolly stepped out, people turned. Some tilted their hats. Others bowed their heads. Santiago pushed past them all, shoulders stiff, rage curling off him like smoke. He didn't look back. Toby helped Nolly down the steps. She walked with the grace of someone no longer running. Ramona joined them. You did it, she said. No, Nolly said. We did. The sun was high now, the sky wide and blue. Horses stood tied in the dust, and the sound of a church bell rang far off. Luciana handed Toby an envelope. There's a school north of here, run by women I trust. They'll take her, give her a place to learn to grow. Toby looked at Nolly. It's your choice, he said. She smiled. I want to go. He nodded. Then we'll ride at first light. That night, the stars came out clean and bright. Nolly sat on the porch beside Toby, her charm bag in her lap, her letter folded tight in her hand. She'd been heard. And that sound, the space her words had carved into the world, was louder than any gunfire or gavel. It was a beginning. He screamed, "She's mine!" And for the first time, no one believed him. Santiago Valles didn't ride out quietly. His boots hit the courthouse steps like he meant to break them. The town watched him move through the square with a fury that made men glance sideways and women pull their children closer. He barked at his lawyer, cursed at the marshal, shoved Delgado's hand off his arm like it burned him. She's mine, he shouted, voice cracking like a whip across the sun-baked street. She's mine by contract, but no one answered. Not the townspeople. Not the law. Not even Eben Yazzie, who stood with his back to the saloon doors, eyes down, lips pressed into a thin line of shame. Luciana Reyes, still standing on the steps with Nolly at her side, didn't move. She didn't flinch. Ramona folded her arms and stared at her brother with eyes that had run out of forgiveness long ago. Santiago turned toward Toby, who stood steady as a stone in the square. You think you won, Santiago snarled. You think hiding behind the judge changes anything I paid for her. I paid in full. She's not for sale, Toby said. She was promised to me. You were promised silence, Luciana said sharply. You don't get that anymore. Santiago turned toward her, hand twitching near his belt. Deputy Delgado stepped between them, hand resting on the butt of his holstered pistol. Don't he warned? Santiago sneered, backing off. A slow murmur passed through the crowd. No one was stepping in to help him. No one was stepping up to defend him. The town, small as it was, had drawn a line. Ramona raised her voice. I have testimony, written and signed. From 3 other women names Santiago doesn't remember, but I do. They'll speak. One from Taos, one from Tucson, one whose sister never came home. You want to keep pushing this fine? We'll push back. Santiago's mouth twisted. You'll burn everything down just to spit at me, Ramona didn't blink. You lit the match a long time ago. He looked to the judge, hoping for something, control, dignity, maybe mercy. But Judge Callahan simply closed his ledger and turned away. The tension snapped. Santiago screamed. She's mine, one last time, voice torn and desperate. And for the first time, no one believed him. He climbed into the saddle like a man too big for the animal beneath him, fists clenched white on the reins. He spat in the dust and rode out of town like a storm that had lost its thunder. Delgado followed slower, glancing back at Nolly. The deputy gave her the smallest nod, apology, or maybe respect. Then he was gone too. Nolly stood still on the steps, heart hammering, breath shallow. Toby stepped to her side. She didn't look up, just asked, "Is it really over?" He didn't answer at first. Just said, "He's broken, but he's not finished." Luciana turned to her. "You stood when it mattered. That's more than most do in a lifetime." Ramona added quietly, "He won't forget that. Neither would anyone else." That night the town buzzed with talk. Inside the boarding house where Luciana had arranged a room for Nolly and Ramona, women brought baskets of bread and dried fruit. A seamstress offered to mend Nolly's dress. A man from the print shop asked if he could quote her in the next issue of the Domingo Times. Nolly said no to the paper. She wasn't ready for strangers to turn her into a symbol. Not yet. She just wanted quiet. And maybe sleep. Toby stayed in a room down the hall, rifle propped by the window. He didn't sleep either. Every sound outside, boots on boards, horses in the dark, made him rise and check the sill. Santiago wouldn't be that bold, not tonight. But bold wasn't the only kind of dangerous. Near midnight, Ramona knocked once and stepped inside. Her face was lined with fatigue. He's headed south. Someone saw him on the Cobra Trail. A lone number 2 riders. Hired. Toby sighed, sat back down. He won't give this up. Ramona nodded. He can't afford to. Not just because of the girl. Because of who heard her. She's not safe. No. But she's not scared anymore. Across the hall, Nolly sat in the dark, hands folded around the charm bag Amos had given her. The paper she had written her statement lay folded on the nightstand corners, worn soft from how often she'd unfolded and refolded it. She thought about Santiago's face, red and twisted. She thought about the way the judge had looked at her, not like a child, not like a problem, but like a person. The way the town had stayed silent while Santiago shouted. She thought about her mother. In the quiet, she whispered, "I said it. You would have been proud." The next morning dawned crisp and dry. Toby waited by the stables while Luciana packed supplies for Nolly's journey north. The school was 3 days' ride safe and tucked between 2 mesas where the roads were thin and the reach of men like Santiago ended. "I'll go with her as far as the pass," Luciana said. "Then Ramona will ride her the rest of the way. The headmistress knows they're coming." Toby glanced toward the boarding house where Nolly stepped out carrying her satchel. She looked different now. Not older exactly. Just clearer. As if something inside her had sharpened overnight. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. Luciana turned to him. "You did something good." "I just opened the door." She walked through it. They saddled up, said quiet goodbyes. Toby didn't try to say much. He didn't have to. Nolly rode out between Luciana and Ramona, the wind tugging at her braid, the sun catching the small blade at her hip. Toby watched until they disappeared beyond the ridge. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He just stood there, feeling something lift off his shoulders that had been there so long, he'd almost forgotten it was weight. He turned back toward the town. It was time to go home. He still had fences to mend, and a storm might still be coming. Sometimes justice leaves a scar, but so does silence. The wind came sharp across the mesa, pushing dry grit through the rocks and stirring the crows that waited on the dead fence line. Toby Nez adjusted the collar of his coat and stepped into the lean-of-it hat, pulled low rifle strapped across his back. The sun hadn't risen yet, but he didn't need light to know the land. He'd walked it enough times to hear the difference when something didn't belong. Hoofprints. 3 horses riding hard. He followed the tracks down toward the dry wash near Amos's Grove boots sinking into soft earth. That trail wasn't for traffic, it was for hiding, for flanking. Santiago hadn't gone south to disappear. He'd gone to circle back. Toby reached the ridge above the grove and knelt. Below, nestled between cottonwoods and brush, smoke curled in thin strands from a hastily covered camp. Santiago wasn't in town anymore. He was here, and he wasn't alone. Harlan's voice echoed in his memory. He'll come back not as a man, but as a cornered animal, and that kind bites worse than any other. Toby eased back over the ridge and made for the ranch. Time was tight. He had to move faster than the past could catch up. By the time he reached the barn, the sky had started to pinken at the edges. Amos was already there, tossing hay to the goats. "You see it?" Amos asked. "South trail." He doubled back. Alone, two with him. Might be scouts. Or worse. Amos nodded once like he'd expected it. Ramona wired in. Said they reached the school last night. Nolly's inside. Safe. Toby closed his eyes for a second. Relief hit him slow like warmth through frost. But it didn't last. "He's not after her anymore," Toby said. "Not directly." Amos stopped moving. "Then who us? Me. Anyone who stood in the way." "You think he'll try here? I think he already has." They checked the locks, the stables, the ridgeline. Toby sent a rider to warn Luciana. If Santiago meant to silence anyone else, he wouldn't stop with a ranch. He'd go for the woman who stood in court and made the law bend. At dusk, Ramona returned, lather still drying on her horse's flank. She rode hard cloak soaked with sweat, but her face calm. "She's good," she said before anyone asked. Eating settled, already reading. Toby smiled for the first time in a long while. "You stayed long." "Just long enough." She slid off the saddle and joined them by the fire. "There's a plan," she said. "I heard from one of Delgado's cousins. Santiago's trying to call in a debt. Some men from over the border. They won't ride in uniform. They won't ask questions." Harlan joined them at the edge of the fence, having ridden from Domingo at first light. 2 nights ago, Santiago offered $500 for a quiet job, Harlan said. "No names. Just a location." "And they took it?" Amos asked. "Desperate men always do." Toby crouched near the fire, staring into the flames. "What's the job?" Harlan didn't blink. "Burn the barn. Leave a message. No survivors." Ramona looked down, voice flat. "He wants the story gone." Toby's mouth set into a hard line. "Then we make sure it survives." That night the ranch didn't sleep. Toby, Amos, and Ramona took turns on the ridge. Harlan set wire traps along the tree line. They kept the lamps low and the doors bolted. By midnight, the coyotes had gone quiet. And that's when they came. First, a flicker of movement at the western gate. Then another shape breaking the line of trees. Silent. Fast. Toby raised the rifle. A shot cracked the night open. One man down before he reached the fence. The rest scattered like shadows. Ramona fired twice from the porch. Amos called out warnings from the loft. Harlan took down the second rider near the trough. Then came the fire. A bottle arced through the air, glass oil rag lit. It hit the side of the barn and exploded into flame. The goats screamed. Amos ran for water while Ramona beat back the first burst with a canvas coat. Toby vaulted the fence rifle swinging. The last rider was already retreating, but he turned once, blade drawn. They clashed near the water trough. Dust rose. Steel flashed. Toby drove the butt of his rifle into the man's ribs, dropping him to the ground. One kick sent the knife flying. The man rolled over, coughing, eyes wide with disbelief. "You tell him," Toby said, voice low, "if he comes again, I won't stop with warning shots." The man spit blood. "You're already dead." Toby stood over him. "Then I'll walk to hell and drag him with me." By dawn, the fire was out. The barn scorched but standing. They lost 2 goats, but the rest were alive. Ramona's hand was blistered. Amos had a split lip, and Toby's knuckles bled through his coat. But they were standing. Luciana arrived just after sunrise, wagon heavy with supplies, a revolver on her hip. "I got the wire," she said. "Is it over?" Toby shook his head. "He's still out there." "But he failed," Ramona said. Luciana looked around. Burned boards, ashes, blood in the dirt. "Sometimes justice leaves a scar," she said. "But so does silence." They buried the dead rider at the edge of the property. No name, no prayers. Nolly's letter, once folded in her bag, now sat framed above the mantel in the ranch house. To remind them why they'd fought. To remind them that stories survive even when men don't want them to. There's a cost to speaking truth, but there's a greater one for staying quiet. Santiago didn't run. He never did. Men like him didn't know how. He just disappeared into the scrub and waited for the right kind of dark. Not the kind that blanketed land, but the kind that wrapped around people's hearts when they were tired, scared, or alone. He knew the town wouldn't take him back, not openly, not after the courthouse, not after the girl. But he had names, debts, and one last plan, and this time he wouldn't fail by fire. Back at the ranch, the air still stank of smoke and scorched wood. Ramona cleaned her burns with whiskey and salt jaw set. Amos hammered new slats over the scorched beams. Harlan watched the southern ridge like he expected it to speak. Toby stood at the edge of the porch, Nolly's letter still pinned in its frame above the mantel. His hand rested on his rifle, but his eyes were far off, locked somewhere past the canyons, where light thinned and revenge festered. "He'll try again," Ramona said. "You know that." "I know. He's cornered." Toby looked at her. "So are we." At noon, a rider came. Not a gunman, just a boy from the edge of town. Barefoot hat too big for his head, red clay on his boots. He handed Toby a folded page sealed in wax. "Toby Nez. Court reconvenes tomorrow. Order signed by Judge Callahan. Presence required. Santiago Velez to be formally charged." The boy looked up. "Miss Reyes says bring everything." Toby nodded and handed him a coin. "You eat today?" The boy grinned, then bolted. Ramona read over Toby's shoulder. "Everything names, letters, testimonies, proof of the others. She means to end it, to starve it." That night they gathered what they had. Ramona pulled names from her pouch, women she'd written to, women who'd written back. Harlan brought receipts from the post, Santiago's payments for shipping freight logs tied to names that vanished. Amos uncovered an old telegram signed by a town doctor who'd ruled a suspicious death natural, with a shaky hand and quiet guilt. Toby stared at the pile. "It's enough." "Will they listen?" Ramona asked. "They don't have to. They just have to hear it." The sun rose slow and cold. They rode together, Ramona, Toby, Harlan, and Amos, 4 witnesses trailing the dust of memory behind them. The courthouse in Domingo felt smaller now. Not in size, but in the way places shrink when they're too full of things that don't fit anymore. Like truth. Like reckoning. Luciana met them at the steps, silver brooch at her collar, her coat sharp against the wind. "He'll be here," she said. "He thinks he can turn it again." "He's wrong," Toby said. Inside, the judge sat higher than he had the week before. Not in posture, but in purpose. The people gathered not for gossip, not for whispers, but for verdicts. Santiago stood with his new lawyer, mean-eyed, city-slicked, and twice as oily as the last. He looked thinner, angrier, but no less certain. He didn't look at Nolly's name on the docket. He looked at Ramona. The judge banged the gavel. This court reconvenes for the purpose of reviewing charges against Santiago Valles' coercion, unlawful marriage endangerment of a minor conspiracy, and attempted arson of a registered homestead. Santiago scoffed. Lies built on women's tears. Luciana rose. No, sir, built on their truth. One by one, the statements were read. Women's names, their ages, where they had lived, when they vanished, when they escaped, when they were found. A woman named Maricela stood shaking and said, "He told me no one would believe me, that my word was dirt." Another Anna from Tucson stood pale but firm. He said if I ran, he'd make it look like I stole from him. And no one would ask questions. And no one did. Then Ramona stood. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. I came because he's my brother, she said, and because I remember when he wasn't like this, before the hunger, before the control. I came to bury what's left, and to make sure he never gets to bury another girl. Santiago barked a laugh. You all crawled out of the wood just for this. Harlan leaned forward. No, we crawled out because someone lit a fire under it. Toby stood last. I don't need the law to tell me what's right, he said. But I'm here because someone younger than me had the courage to stand when most of us stayed sitting. She wrote the truth before she even knew who would read it. So now you will. He pulled the framed letter from his coat and placed it on the bench. Judge Callahan read it aloud. Slowly. Every word. No one moved, not even Santiago. The courtroom, thick with heat and breath, fell into a silence so deep it rang. When it ended, the judge said, This court finds sufficient cause for arrest, trial, and restraining order, effective immediately. Mr. Valles, you will be taken into custody, your assets frozen, your movements restricted, your name placed on record. Santiago turned toward Ramona. You were blood. Ramona looked back. And you were a man. Once. The deputies led him out. He didn't struggle, just stared ahead like he didn't recognize the world anymore. On the steps outside, the crowd had gathered, people waiting, some to jeer, some to learn. Toby exhaled slow. Luciana touched his arm. It won't bring the others back. No, he said, but it might stop the next. Ramona looked toward the horizon. There's a cost to speaking truth, but there's a greater one for staying quiet. The wind blew soft now. No smoke. Just dust and the first green shoots on the edges of town. The kind that grow after something's been cleared away. You protected me when I had no power. I came back because now I do. The road to the ranch was dry that spring, cracked with old memory and shaped by wind. Yellow flowers scattered across the mesa like stars fallen too early, and the smell of creosote drifted through the air after the morning rain. Toby stood in the field mending the last of the east fence. His shoulders ached the way they always did after a winter, but the work felt clean now, earned, grounded. The barn had been rebuilt. Smaller, simpler, but stronger. The goats were fewer, but healthy. The windmill turned again. Everything was quieter. Until he heard the hooves. One rider. Light, quick. Unfamiliar in rhythm but steady. Not urgent, not hiding. Just coming home. He dropped the hammer and stood still, wiping dust on his pant leg, eyes squinting into the sun. She came over the ridge at a slow trot, riding a chestnut mare with a white blaze on her face. Her back was straight braid, long shoulders, easy in the saddle. A satchel bounced against her hip. The hem of her skirt dusted the stirrups. She wore a scarf knotted at her neck and a small silver pin over her collar. Not flashy, just firm. A shape that looked like a star tucked into a circle. She smiled when she saw him, and the years fell away. "Nolly," he said, his voice barely carrying. She swung down from the saddle with practiced grace boots soft on the earth. "Been a while." He stepped forward. 3 years. Feels longer. You look different." "I am." He looked at her, really looked at the way she stood, the way she scanned the land like it was hers now too. Not a girl anymore. Not someone hiding behind other people's strength. "I got your letter," he said. "I almost didn't write." "Why did you?" She smiled again, soft and sharp. "Because I wanted you to know I remember." He nodded, unsure what to do with his hands. "You riding through or staying, I was hoping I could stay a bit. If you've got a cot, I've got your room." He stepped aside and she led the horse to the barn. He followed, trying not to stare too much. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of fresh hay. She tied off the reins and brushed down the mare like it was second nature. "You working stock?" he asked. "No. Teaching. To ride, to read, to write." Some of the girls there never held a pencil before. He nodded slowly. "That why you came back?" She looked over her shoulder. "Partly." He waited. "I came back because I owed you," she said. "But not just for hiding me. Not for protecting me from Santiago. You don't owe me anything." "I do," she said firmly, turning to face him. "You protected me when I had no power. I came back because now I do." His eyes flicked to the pin on her collar. "That a badge of sorts? Deputy volunteer. I file reports, help with testimony. Mostly for girls like I was." His throat tightened, but he swallowed it. "That's good work. I learned from someone who did it when it was harder." They stood quiet for a moment. Dust floated in the light. "You gonna tell me what happened to him?" he asked finally. "Santiago." He nodded. Serving 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Charges stacked too high for any lawyer to dig through. He appealed. Twice. Denied both times. He looked out at the fence line. "And your father?" She took a breath. "Gone. Left before the trial finished. No one's seen him since." "I'm sorry." "I'm not," she said. "Not anymore." They walked back toward the house, boots crunching in the dirt. A breeze rolled in off the ridge, tugging her braid behind her. "You still get riders?" she asked. "Sometimes. Amos passed last year. Harlan's got arthritis. Ramona still writes." "I read her book. She's writing now, 2 chapters in. Says your story's next." He chuckled. "She'd need to cut a lot out." "She won't. Says the quiet ones are the ones worth hearing." They reached the porch. He held the screen door open, and she stepped inside. It smelled the same wood smoke dust, something like mint. She walked over to the mantel. Her letter was still there. Faded now. Edges curled. She reached out and touched the frame, then looked back. "You kept it." He shrugged. "Reminded me why we fight." "I brought another." She dug into her satchel and pulled out a folded page, creased but clean. She handed it over and he unfolded it carefully. It wasn't written in a child's hand anymore. The script was confident, full. Justice wasn't a man with a badge. It was a man with a quiet voice who said no when everyone else said yes. He didn't save me. He stood with me while I saved myself. He read it twice before folding it again. "May I?" She nodded. He stepped to the mantel and placed it beside the first. They sat on the porch as the sun began to fall behind the hills. She sipped from a mug he'd filled, and he leaned back in the chair that had belonged to his father. They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. The quiet settled soft around them. Not the silence of fear. The kind that comes after the fight is over. The kind that feels like peace.